Native versus web apps. Yeah, not a tough question at all. We'll let Bill start with this one.
Okay.
So Bill, if you didn't hear, well, Bill started the day, but if you got late because you were drinking last night or something, Bill's from an interesting question to you. Go ahead.
Well, I think there are a lot of smart people working on, native apps, right? Those ecosystems. HTML and giving them access to the device with standards-based APIs. So that's the particular role that we see ourselves doing.
And what do you think of Microsoft's new OS that's kind of, we're making native apps with web? Do you think that's real?
The talk that I saw looked really awesome. It seems like a really nice, clean way to do it. I'd love to see the JavaScript APIs get into a standards process.
Right. Are you going to throw your Mac out and get a Windows box so you can develop for that? I didn't think so. Pamela, I was watching you do Twitter feed, and you were using a browser, right?
Correct.
But there's TweetDeck. There's really awesome native apps. Why weren't you using native apps?
Because I don't like to have multiple windows open. I just want to have one window.
So you're okay with the tabs in Chrome?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're okay with the tabs, but you don't want multiple apps. Okay.
Yeah. So for the.
It's multiple processes for Chrome, right? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I alternate between Firefox and Chrome, just to keep you guys happy. But for the native versus web, I spent last year going down the whole phone gap route because I was like, well, I already know how to do web development. I'm going to go ahead and apply what I know to this area because I'd never done mobile development. And it was a bitch. The mobile browsers. They're not fun, right? I spent 2 weeks trying to get a blinking cursor to show up in a text field, and I failed. 4 months later, another person finally found a solution. So there definitely were issues, and it was a huge learning process, but I do think it's the direction we're going, and so I'm glad I put in the effort to do that and to document, all the stuff I ran into, and I think that the web doesn't seem to be dying anytime soon, so it's a good investment, even if it takes a bit more time now to make those hybrid apps. It's not like you're learning stuff that's not going to be applicable elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, if one of you has something very key to say on that, please do raise your fingers and let me know to start talking. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, so we've been having a HTML5 offline capable application targeting mobile devices in production for 2 years now. And what we noticed is that our customers aren't actually requesting a native app at all. They just want the functionality.
Okay.
And for us, that means one single code base.
All right, so here's a question. Not as developers or company owners or CTOs and all that stuff, not that, but as a user, who here is using an online or a web app for their IDE, for their development? Is any of you actually coding using something like, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but some web app? What's that?
Cloud9.
Cloud9, thank you. For an example.
I use it for when I'm teaching. I use Cloud9. It's really good for that because I'm already using HTML5 slides in the browser. I'm previewing. So if I'm teaching HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, it's the perfect IDE for that.
But if I said go home tonight and go develop something, would you be using a native client?
No. Sorry. I'm using Sublime or Vim. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Sublime. You use Sublime? Text me. Sublime.
Yeah.
Haven't switched VI. Don't.
But I think it's just because they're not mature, right? It's the maturity, right? So we have so many plugins now for Sublime. You've got syntax highlighting for this, that, and the other. And, it's going to take time. And when it comes to IDEs, it's something where you have to, force yourself to try out something new.
Yeah.
And so I think we should all, take a week where we just force ourselves to, try a web IDE, give
I'm
them,
sure the
like,
Cloud9 folks will be very happy with you saying that. Yeah, definitely. Okay, Kyle, do you have anything else to say about that? Please.
Well, to kind of echo what they were saying, I think it's incredibly naive to have a mobile application strategy that is either only native or only web. And I know that there are a lot of reasons why companies choose that, but I think it's very naive because I think the clear trend is the mixing of this technology. But as much as I love JavaScript and HTML5, I don't think that we will ever reach the point where JavaScript will run as fast as compiled C++. So I think that there will always be cases where in extremely performance-intensive code, you do need to use the native capabilities of that device. So I'm a huge fan of things like Firefox OS and the others that are going, and the ones that came before it, like WebOS and so forth. Huge fan of that. But I don't think that the web platform is going anywhere in any of our lifetimes or our careers. I've bet my whole career on JavaScript and HTML5. So I think it will be a core component, and where you put that slider will be different depending on your company.
Cool. Bart, you want to say that?
I don't fully agree with you. It is true that native application can be much faster, but for most application, the speed of improvement of JavaScript on mobile devices is so great that in a few years it won't make any difference. It is true that some applications which will still require a lot of power, but mostly games or highly graphic application. Most business application can just be JavaScript and plain HTML. That would be enough. I think so. That's my opinion.
Laura here founded 4D in '83 or '84, and has a long history of being an amazing developer. In the last 2 years, his whole company has been focused on JavaScript with Wakanda, which I'm sure you all know quite a bit about at this point. And I was able to talk with him quite extensively during one of the talks in one of the back rooms. And one of the things that I heard you say about Wakanda is that you just abhor templating. No templating for HTML rendering. Just no. So Wakanda, of course, by default is using jQuery for binding, and I'm assuming, so you're sending static HTML documents. In fact, the app's built with HTML only static, right?
Exactly, yeah. No templating because of, it is often a very big security breach. I mean, possibility that when you template in your code running on the server, you put some data coming from your database or from any kind of data you got from the user that may contain some code, some PHP if it's PHP, or some JavaScript if it's templating in JavaScript, which that then can run in the server with a privilege you don't want to. So we try to do everything client side.
Yeah, and you're using like attributes. You're using metadata.
Yes. Yeah, basically it's HTML with tags and data attributes.
It's clean HTML. It's not.
Yes.
Okay. Pamela, Caldera is serving a blank slate HTML document, nothing there at all. And then you've got Jade, I think, for your templating system.
Yeah.
And so JavaScript all the way with Jade to render everything. Mm-hmm. Which one of you is right?
There's no such right answer. I will say one of the nice things about our setup, I mean, we're doing Jade which looks like HTML but without all the brackets, and we're doing Stylus, which looks like CSS but without all the punctuation, and then we're doing piping them also into Backbone. Security-wise, I think we're fine with the kind of input we're taking. And I think something that's cool is that our designers have taught themselves Jade and Stylus over the last few weeks, and I've managed I now have like 6 pull requests waiting for my designer, who like 2 weeks ago didn't know what version control was or any of this stuff, right? So I think it's pretty cool for any setup, right? Whether it's theirs or ours, it's just something I've observed, that it's pretty cool if you can have people come in like that, and if your setup is understandable enough where they can contribute. So if we were using something which programmatically built up a UI, like XJS or Sencha does that sort of style, then I would have to go and teach our designers, object-oriented programming and that stuff, which I'm certainly keen to do, but that takes time.
Okay, yeah. I would like everybody's opinion on templating. Go ahead.
Just to throw a shout out to a colleague of mine, Daniel Buchner at Mozilla, is working on something he calls X tags, which is based on web components. So you're actually extending the HTML tag set with new tags, so they feel like real honest-to-God tags, yet they extend the behavior and give you new things. So that's something to look into.
I've never heard of that idea. I'm sorry. I feel like templating, for so long has been, oh, let me pull a new one up, another one, and to me, it's just every time I pick up a new templating language, I'm like, oh, why? And I spend a lot of time in XML, XSLT, so I know templating pain. I'm very aware of that.
Testify.
And I've yet to find one that I'm like, I keep on wanting one and go, yeah, this feels better. It never does to me. Anybody here feel the same way, or you guys all like templates? Okay.
The thing is that if you're going for offline capability, for example, you don't want to synchronize full HTML sources, so you have to do a client-side templating in that case.
Right.
And we've been using Knockout for that. Also have one with Mustache. But Knockout is prettier. Mustache supports different scenarios.
What I really hate is duplication, right? And I hate duplication, and I want reuse. And so that's the thing that
And all those greater than less thans are duplication right off the bat, so Jade's clearly better choice. Sorry. Kyle, you got a good opinion about this.
I am enormously opinionated about templating. I think, first of all, that one of the biggest reasons why templating is so powerful is that I think it is going to enable, and we're seeing the emergence of it a little bit. I wish we'd see it more. But a class or a breed of applications, if you will, that is going to be what I called reactive earlier in my talk. Essentially, the concept that your templates can run exactly the same, whether they run on the client or they run on the server. That's not just a dry thing, which is also a really helpful thing to only have to write your templates once, but that actually allows your application to respond to the performance characteristics that it sees in real time. So if you detect that a mobile device has a really low bandwidth connection and all of that round tripping to the server is a problem, you might force a little bit more of your templating to happen on the browser. And the reverse might be true if you also detected that you could take advantage of that power in the server. So I think templating is enormously powerful. I'm very much on board with templating. I wrote my own templating engine of one of millions, but I would say to the security question, I'm a little bit surprised by that, because I would just say bluntly, if your templating engine is capable of taking code and executing that code, your templating engine is just simply doing it wrong. That's not the goal of a templating engine, and you should not have large amounts of code embedded in your templates. That is a violation of separation of concerns. That's a reason why we do templates. One of the things that people railed against for years and years was, look at all this JavaScript code that's just got a bunch of string concatenation to build up our HTML. We got a DOM API so that we could stop doing a little bit of that. We've just done the inverse now. Now we have a bunch of HTML templating that has a bunch of code embedded in it. It's two sides of the same problem. Yep. So code doesn't belong in the templates.
And fair enough, it's a complicated issue. Yeah. Okay. Any other talks about templating? Yeah.
So, sorry, when I said I was against templating on the server. Actually, what we do when with tags and embedding the data source coming from the data is done at the client in the browser. So we actually run that once, and on the browser.
Is that a JavaScript DSL that you're talking about to make HTML, or are you just taking HTML?
It's HTML plus a small JavaScript library that actually modified the page.
Cool. All right. Let's see. What time is it, folks?
Got about 10 minutes.
All right. Just ask a really simple question. Synchronous or asynchronous?
Are you just randomly coming up with words with opposites?
I know. Let's see. Well, let's talk. Let's talk about open. Any questions from the audience is a chance to win a book.
Good one.
Okay.
Do not just stand up and give two different words and hope to talk about it.
Yeah. Well,
I will ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're seeing TypeScript, Dart, CoffeeScript, all the different competing languages for JavaScript. What are your thoughts on those different?
So the question is, CoffeeScript, Dart, lots of other competitors to JavaScript. Do we like JavaScript, or we want something else?
JavaScript. I have been writing JavaScript for 12 years. I have never once went into a scenario where JavaScript as a language was inferior to some other language. And moreover, I would say somewhat politically, I don't necessarily consider those to be competitors to JavaScript, especially since most of them are compiling to JavaScript. In my mind, that's what makes JavaScript superior, is that it's such a good target language for all those other higher level DSLs.
Anybody else?
Well, in my experience, like, the libraries are much more important to me than the language, right? Having good libraries, that means I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and we've learned anything today that we've got that. And then even more importantly is the community dominates libraries, right? If I have people I can get answers from and get ideas from, then that's also really important. So I think all those things are here. And I also think we're sitting on the shoulders of, at least from where I sit, warring teams of people who just cannot sleep if their JavaScript engine is slower than the other guys, right? So the more of that we have, we win,
Yeah, so I like CoffeeScript because it's pretty, but I don't use it. And the core reason for that is I had a friend who was like, oh, CoffeeScript, it's the best shit ever. So we used that a bit, and then all of a sudden he said, and I just love compiling my JavaScript. And I was like, but that ruined it. I don't want to compile my stuff. That's part of the fun of using JavaScript in the first place.
Isn't that what the continuation server does in your main?
Oh yeah, that is but it also runs tests. I mean, so now we're coming into the subject of verifying your code and statically typed languages and whatnot. And that's sort of the job of a unit test, because unit test does that for you.
I think for me, it's the debug is just not fun in CoffeeScript. I mean, and yes, I know people can figure it out and they got it working, and no. Thanks.
Source matter is going to fix that.
Of course. Since we brought up, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you mind? Sure. Okay. So what's wrong with all these libraries that everybody loves so much?
So my talk was, you don't need a framework for that, so I assume that's why I was asked the question. Frameworks are okay if you're doing like a web application, but if you're doing a website,
Get element by ID.
Why?
Actually works, right?
But also, as the Twitter example that I gave this morning, using a framework, I mean, if everything is reliant on JavaScript, no one's going to have a page to see until everything is downloaded, parsed, and rendered. And how long is that taking for all of your JavaScript to come through? So, you know, if you are going to use 100% JavaScript for your application, make it 99% and give them something to see while they're waiting. You know, even if it's a bouncing ball, let them know that something's happening.
Thank you, Phil.
I think that's really, I mean, you have to go into these things with your eyes open, right? That can be really, and you're always trading off developer productivity against something, right? And you can get really far, really fast with jQuery, and then you're suddenly, you know, testing things out on an edge network, 2G, and you're like, wow, yeah, this is no fun.
Also, there's an interesting thing that someone said this Easter to me, and that's, well, most people only use like 1% of jQuery. And jQuery right now is actually quite big. So that's a big payload to get to just use a small percentage of it.
Especially when the 1% is grabbing an element by something you could do easily in JavaScript. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, so you can use Zepto, like you can try, well, first you could just use, you know, get element by ID, but as soon as you get to, you know, other stuff, you might want the jQuery syntax. So you can start with Zepto, and I found when I ported my mobile hybrid app from jQuery to Zepto, and porting my actual code was easy because, you know, just append whatever, it all works. But what was annoying was porting the plugins. So you talk about that 1%. The jQuery plugins out there use the other 99%. They use every single obscure, like, additional argument of a thing and like this unknown behavior. They use it all, right? So jQuery plugins, those take a long time to port. So I'm hoping that maybe, like, the thing is that jQuery plugins are basically now the JavaScript plugins, right? Like, that's because jQuery was the first people to come up with a plugin infrastructure, and now it's just the way that people write things, it's like, this is a jQuery plugin, right? That's like when you look at it, someone's SDK, they'll be like, okay, we have Java and Python and a jQuery plugin, right? And that's just because they were the first one to come up with it. But it does mean that we have this dependence on jQuery to use all these great UI plugins out there. So what I'm hoping is that the jQuery plugin authors of the future test using like the minimal API, like the Zepto API, or even smaller than that, so that we can then just mix, like use these different plugins with different things. Or maybe that they adopt an even a better plugin architecture, maybe like web components or something like that. Because I think that's why a lot of people are using jQuery, because it's for the plugins, right?
Yeah.
What I've seen with a lot of developers who actually try not to use a framework for their website, that they will eventually start to do a few functions to help them out, and finally they build their own framework.
That's why we have so many, right?
Yeah, which is smaller, of course, than maybe a full jQuery with plugins and so on, but they finally build a kind of small framework. But still, I agree with you. For a website, I will not go framework. It's more for web applications where it really makes sense, actually.
Okay, so I've got a Node question for you. Who here can? Here's the Node thought. Is the callback spaghetti hell of Node inherent to JavaScript, or because of the nature of how Node is implemented?
So let me take that question, because I asked a very similar question directly to some of the folks that run Node, and the answer that I got literally was, so they defined themselves as callback style driven development. I think if you look outside of the world of Node, or even into userland Node, where people have created all kinds of promise and async flow libraries and things like that, you can see that it does not have to be that way, but Node defines itself intrinsically as callback driven. And like it or not, that is how they define themselves.
Any other thoughts?
It's nice to have an opinionated system, right? Then you know whether you're doing it right or not. You know, if you can think about your problem that way, then you're going to be happy coding your problem that way, and the code will be legible. And if you are straining to think of your problem that way, then the code will be horrible, and you'll be sorry.
I'm sorry if there are a lot of people who like Node here, but to tell the truth, I don't like the way Node makes it necessary to use callback methods for everything. I think the code becomes soon unreadable when you have a lot of callback inside callbacks and so on. It's like a spaghetti. And we tried a different approach with Wakanda to actually allow for synchronous call on multi-threaded stuff, but that actually behaves well by stopping the process doing, for example, a read access to disk or on the network and resuming whenever it's available. So I think it's easier to program that way.
I just want to respond to that point specifically. I don't think that Node by any means requires callback style driven. Certainly their native API is callback driven, but it does not require that. And I would say from watching Node.js mature over the last 2 or 3 years, I think the way of things often is that a developer starts out in Node using the canonical way, which is useful for help. It's useful for documentation and so forth, that there is a very standard style. The API itself follows that. But most developers then do graduate to some more sophisticated form of asynchronous code flow that does not involve 18 levels of nested callbacks, and I think that's okay too. That's a richer community, and whether the founders of Node.js choose to say that's just not Node.js or not, that may be limited, but the platform itself is not limited. You can do whatever you can do in JavaScript.
Have you heard the term nodes for the multi-threaded solution to Node, the multi-distributed? Have you heard that term?
I haven't heard that term. I've heard of fibers and some of the others. That there's so it's important to understand that there's a difference between asynchronicity, which is what we're talking about, and parallelism. And parallelism, using actual separate OS threads and fibers and so forth, is people trying to bolt fundamentally different things on top of the language, whereas asynchronicity is built into the language as part of the event loop.
Go ahead.
Hi, I have watched the evolution of JavaScript since its creation by Brandon in 1995, TypeScript to JavaScript to ECMAScript. When it was in Netscape, there
the question? Are we mad at ECMAScript for not moving forward with the language? Are you guys angry? No, I mean, are you happy with the state of JavaScript? Mr. Croft?
Almost. I just wish they would implement something, but maybe not that useful for every website, but at least for web applications, for business application. I wish they would implement financial numbers, not real numbers, but true financial numbers that could be more useful in accounting and those kind of stuff. But it's only a small detail.
I wish someone could just fix that date objects.
The which?
The date objects.
The date object in general. That's like 60% of why we have libraries, is because it doesn't work well.
Yeah. My boyfriend, Anton, he started this thing with a couple other people in the community called JS Fixed. And I think they oriented it around a GitHub tracker. And they created it because they were angry at what they perceived to be the ECMAScript committee not actually listening to the community. Right? Sometimes standards committees might be full of, people that aren't actually developing with the language, and so they were kind of afraid that they weren't getting the practical feedback. So they created JS Fixed, and they did this as a GitHub issue tracker, and they asked the community everyone to tell them what it is that they wanted out of ECMAScript, and what is it that the committee weren't considering, and what they would actually propose. And so they wrote a blog post, and he actually met with some of the people on the committee, and I think they actually made some progress, and I think the committee started listening more.
So the Git sourced solution to that, I mean, was there consensus on some things?
They did manage to come with some consensus, and they wrote up a doc that said this is the proposal that most people agreed on. I mean, there's no perfect solution, so they also wrote, here's the pros and the cons and the different things. But I think they actually managed to come to more of a consensus than they would have otherwise, right? People are used to trying to come to consensus on Git threads, so they were able to use that as a platform to come up with reasonable recommendations for ECMAScript.
Also, I'd like to just defend ECMAScript, not being on the body, but just defend them for a moment. Throughout my career with JavaScript, especially over the last 3 to 4 years, I've had periods of time where I was more or less involved in the discussion lists, not on TC39, the committee, but the discussion lists. And I've seen a number of the same problems, had a number of the same frustrations. I even, at one point, bought a domain because I was going to create a whole separate group, and then I thought better of myself. So I've seen the full spectrum of they're doing some awesome stuff, and man, why on earth won't they just give us this? If you have not seen recently Brendan Eich's talk, State of JavaScript 2012, he just gave it at Strange Loop most recently. That video is up online. I highly recommend you go see that. And he advances the notion that this language is actually maturing in a really good way, and in a way that we may see the full maturity that most people have been wanting from the language. So in the end, as much as people hated classes and not classes and hated all these other things, in the end what has arisen from that process is a very responsible maturation of this language. And I think you got to give them credit for that, because there are very few that have been able to withstand as many arrows thrown at them as JavaScript has.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask one question.
Yeah.
Looking to the future, I'm on the panel to be futurologist now, to give a prediction. We look at the past, we look at the script question. I want to ask a question about the future. Given that the web is changing, becoming more interactive, given that development has to become user experience, people, or the other way around, something's going to happen in the future. What
I'm going to interrupt this and suggest that we all talk about this over drinks, because we're out of time. So thank you.
That's the future I predict.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank 4D for putting this on. I've learned a lot today. I know that you all have too. And see you over at drinks in a few minutes. Thank you. Don't forget to come back tomorrow.